Okay, everyone, we are 2 minutes after the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get things kicked off this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining. This is going to be our first panel discussion here with Eduphoria, so we are so excited for you to be a part of this conversation. We'll do some housekeeping in just a moment, but today our focus is going to be having some discussions about local processes around evaluation practices. So again, thank you so much for joining us. This afternoon, Paige Parker will be our host. So she's going to be helping facilitate questions through that Q&A window that you have access to and provide some additional insights throughout our conversation. I am Tara Whedon, your moderator for this great conversation in which we'll get to feature some very wonderful voices from our Texas district. So next up is those housekeeping. As you noticed when you came in, we are recording this session, and that means that as a registered attendee, you will be getting a email with the recording of this conversation. Also, if you have a colleague that registered and was not able to attend today, they will also get that email and have access to the recording. We have a couple ways that you're able to engage with us throughout this conversation. The main one is going to be that Q&A window. So if you have a question that you would like our panelists to see or our Eduphoria staff to respond to, please do drop that in the Q&A window. This will allow us to respond to that and capture that if we need any follow-up that we can support you with. We will also have a chat option available to you. So the chat, we will invite you a couple times throughout our conversation to share with us a little bit about what this looks like for you in your district. And that can also be general conversations that you have with other attendees that are present. So we'll go ahead and go to our next slide. Our objectives during this conversation is really to focus on collaboration throughout the evaluation process. So we know there are some elements of compliance with our evaluation processes, but we also want to focus on growth for our educators and for ourselves in the ways we engage through evaluation and highlight that collaboration. We'll also look at some opportunities to be truly intentional with how you set up your processes in the Strive application. And really a big focus of this conversation is going to be on the coaching and instructional leadership that is present in your district. So our agenda, how we're going to navigate through these topics this afternoon. We're going to start with some introductions of our panelists, and then we'll go through some big key topics on communication, actionable data, hearing some local examples of instructional focus areas, and we will wrap up with some topics on Strive setup. So without further ado, it is time to meet our panelists. So joining us from East Glen ISD, we have Shelley, and she is the Director of Instruction and Curriculum. She works at East Glen ISD, which is a mid-sized 3A district serving around 1,100 students, and she serves across 3 campuses. Shelley loves that from her role, she is able to support teachers and administrators by providing tools, information, and methods which have a direct and measurable impact on the quality of education students receive. Our next panelist, who we seem to be having some technical difficulties, so he's not present just yet, but we'll loop him in as he is able to jump in, is Wayne Morin, and he is the area superintendent at Lamar Consolidated ISD. This is one of the fastest growing districts in the state, and they serve around 42,000 students across 47 campuses. Wayne is an advocate of supporting campus leaders and does so through instructional rounds, campus walks, with teachers and observing PLCs. And then our final panelist this afternoon is Jeremy Wagner. He has recently served as a director of STEM and advanced academics. As you can see today, we are representing him through Eddy ISD. His previous work was in rapidly growing districts, which served around 7,000 students, and is slated to be opening a second high school in the very near future. While Jeremy did inform a lot of district level practices around the evaluation practices. He has a love for creating growth and collaboration opportunities with educators and found lots of opportunities to engage in classrooms as an instructional coach. So why are we on this topic today? Because coaching is so important for the growth of your district and for the future of your students. We know when we are able to engage in an individualized capacity, when we're driven by that feedback, we can identify those needs, add that personal touch that our classrooms and our teachers crave through this evaluation process, and we can really engage in a dynamic way. And this also helps us model those expectations. So those teachers that are in your classroom today, they might be the principal serving your district next year. So it's great that through these processes, we can really implement those collaborative opportunities and help grow from within your district. So our first topic this afternoon is really focusing on the ins and outs of communication. So I am certain anywhere you have worked in or outside of the sphere of education, you've likely received the global feedback identifying poor communication, either for yourself personally or at your organization. So we're going to talk about some big ideas and the details about how, when, and where to communicate. So we're going to pick our panelists' brains on this topic. So our first question really gets us centered on collaboration. As we start the conversation, we want to recognize that both compliance and collaboration have a place in a well-designed evaluation process. As coaches and leaders, we get to walk this line of ensuring standards are met and also helping those around us achieve successes that they may or may not have defined for themselves. So I know I can attribute much of my growth to what others have seen in me and helped promote and grow in a professional setting. So Shelley, we'll hear from you first. So we'd love to hear from your perspective, how important is this topic of nurturing collaboration throughout the evaluation process?
Okay, well, hello, everybody. I think that is a very important process to go through. We've had to kind of, make a shift with our mindset. And I think the biggest piece here is just making sure that everyone is clear, that they have a clear understanding of the purpose of appraisal and what we're looking for. That it's about professional growth. It's not about a gotcha moment or a score or anything like that. It's about how can we provide better education for our students. And when we talk about that more, we communicate that more, then I think collaboration does tend to increase, because it's not a matter of here's my final score, conversation is closed. This is an ongoing process, and we're going to continue to grow together. And when everyone understands that, that is going to make that process easier. But that definitely is something we are still working on.
Awesome. Thank you, Shelley, for sharing those insights. Jeremy, as you were able to listen to Shelley and from your own insights, what are some things you might add here or some related experiences you have for collaboration throughout the evaluation process?
The first thing I want to point out is just to reiterate something that Shelley said. Everyone really has to be on the same page with the process and what this actually looks like. If you have certain administrators, certain teachers, certain campuses, whatever the subgroup may be, doing it differently than everyone else, expectations being off kilter can really cause the entire process of collaboration to fall apart, because of how collaboration is so closely linked with culture. The ability to collaborate is so tied with culture and the understanding that this is not necessarily punitive, it's about growth. And that's what the mindset has to be centered around, is that at the bottom line, we're here to improve our practice, to improve for students, no matter what our role might be, whether we're an instructor, assistant support, or even a district level administrator, a campus administrator. And so you mentioned when you were introducing me some of my experiences as an instructional coach. I do find that when you put on the instructional coach hat, one of the first things you have to do is build that relationship with whoever it is that you're evaluating in the evaluation process. They have to know you a little bit, not necessarily as a person, like on a personal level, but who you are as a person in a sense of like, I know I can trust this person. I know that the conversation will be productive, and I know that I'm going to be heard, And in turn, because I know I'm going to be heard, I'm going to be willing to hear the feedback that's coming my way as well.
Thank you for those additional insights. Took me a second to find my mute button, so I appreciate the momentary pause and your patience. So next up, our question really relates to reflections on growth. We know that this is something we talk about a lot, having a growth mindset. And as educators and as humans, we're constantly faced with change. In the past decade, districts across the state have largely adopted T-tests as their primary evaluation system. And this introduced changes in how we discuss growth that's observed in our classrooms. And we also know more recently, we've faced some natural disasters that have had us put things like holds and pauses on engaging in evaluation so that our attention could be turned to other things. The most recent one that's impacted us at large is the pandemic, and we've changed some of our processes and routines, and maybe we're looking to return back to some things we were doing previously. So Shelley, I know that you engage in collecting data and updating your processes based on some of the things that are going on in your environment locally. Can you speak to some shifts you've seen in professional norms over time?
Sure. This is something that we had a very set process, that we would go through when we were getting ready for appraisals. And using the T-test rubric gives us a very broad idea of what's happening in the classroom. And when we started looking at those norms, and this is just how we do this, we did have to make some changes. And of course, one of the biggest things that we had to make the shift from with T-tests was the realization that teachers pretty typically under PDOS kind of expected to get that perfect score or near perfect score. That was just kind of the expectation that the teachers had. So we really had to work with our teachers to help them start seeing the appraisal as an opportunity for growth. And as I said before, not that final grade that closes the conversation. So one of the things that I do is I do a very in-depth rubric training with our teachers to make sure that they understand that the ratings that they're earning. We dig in, we see what those descriptors look like, we relate that back to the classroom and some of the things that we want to see day to day in and out of the room. And that helps them to better understand what it is that we're looking for so that they have more control over that rating and they have more control over that growth. So the next step then is working with our admin and our appraisers through calibration activities. And we, work on giving the kind of feedback that should be given when we're focusing on growth. If growth is not the focus, my feedback doesn't need to be very in depth. Because the idea there is I've gotten a grade and now I'm just going to move on to the next thing. When I'm trying to guide a teacher towards growth, that feedback needs to be actionable so that it can be taken and applied into the classroom. I think also there's this focus on previously that super polished show lesson that sometimes those of us who have been doing this for a while and did this under PDOS, we saw that frequently. And the more we've talked about collaboration and the more we have talked about growth, teachers have become more comfortable with those random drop-ins. Whether it's for a walkthrough, whether it's for an observation, we will actually have teachers tell our appraisers for their full-length observation, just come in. I just want you to come in when you can, because they know that it's, first of all, they've learned the tools, they've been trained in the instructional strategies, but they know that the focus is growth. It's about what are you seeing that can help me get better? And it's not about a gotcha moment. So we're seeing less of that kind of horse and pony show as we used to talk about. So that's been a major shift in norms that we've seen over the last years and months.
Shelley, thanks so much for sharing. And I love to hear that your teachers want your staff to show up at any point in time. To me, that speaks to the trust that has been generated, that they know they have an opportunity to grow and get valuable feedback anytime you enter their classrooms, instead of responding from a place of fear and being protective and not wanting you to approach at random. So I love hearing that your teachers are very open doors and welcoming of that feedback and engagement. Jeremy, is there anything you would like to share on this topic of, in relation to growth conversations, changes in norms that you have observed?
Shelley really hit the nail on the head with her response, and covered, I think, the essence of a lot of the big changes that we have felt as a culture across the entire state. Professional growth conversations have really taken a more critical and important place in these conversations in recent years, months. Prior to T-Test, when we were back in the PDOS days, growth conversations were very limited to just those teachers that needed to improve or needed to find somewhere else to be. And that's not the expectation anymore. Every teacher, every administrator engages in these growth conversations, or should be engaging in these growth conversations. Also, these days, the emphasis has changed to be about every teacher and finding an area of growth and making strides to find ways to actually make that change. It's more actionable, it's more specific. It's like, so what are you going to do to make that growth? Granted, we all know this within our districts. There are a lot of teachers that are doing a truly excellent job, and sometimes it can be difficult to find areas of refinement. That doesn't necessarily mean there isn't somewhere that we can go from great to phenomenal, if that makes sense. And then additionally, growth is also taking a slightly different context, with instructional growth being tied to student performance growth as well. That's a really big change, I would say, in the last year. It's 6 months to a year, maybe a little further back than that. But with the implementation of things like MAP tests being more widely used and the teacher incentive allotment being more widely implemented, student growth is being closely tied to that professional growth and that instructional growth as well. And so those things have to be considered in these conversations.
Thanks so much for adding on to that, Jeremy. And we have some people sharing in the chat. So we did post a little opportunity for you to engage with us and share additional norms you've seen. So seeing that we have seen an increase in administrator present, not just walking through the halls, but the amount of time that they're spending in classrooms has increased. That is wonderful to hear. And I hope that you celebrate that at your campuses. So next, we have this big topic of feedback. So this is a pivotal part of many of these processes. Sharing the feedback, being able to act on the feedback can present challenges in our communication. So it sounds like we've got some good growth practices established at both of your local settings. So Shelley, one of the things I observed in our planning conversations and getting to know you is I can see that you're a creator of systems, and you really use data to evaluate and find trends so that you know what is and is not working for your teachers and the rest of your staff. So can you tell us a little bit about how you collect this type of feedback and then act on it to improve the appraisal process at Eastland ISD?
Yes, I can do that. One of the things that we were noticing, the T-test rubric is a great rubric. But what we were noticing is in those moments where we needed to be able to get into the classroom quickly, do a good evaluation of what we were seeing, and then having usable data that we could then take back, analyze, and act upon, the T-test rubric just wasn't doing that for us in those quick moments. So we took a step back from that, and I created a form that I call the pulse check form. And where that came from was basically an idea of, I want to check the vitals of the classrooms and of the campuses and of the district. Just like when you go to the doctor and you walk in and they do that real quick check, that's what I wanted. So we started using this pulse check form to assess that. And it looks for some very specific things. So for example, the way I set the form up, as soon as I walk into the room, it gives me the opportunity to know, what is the teacher doing? Am I seeing direct instruction? Am I seeing learning going on? Or are we monitoring a transition? Or are we maybe seeing things that aren't desirable? The next section of this form talks about the instructional setting. Am I seeing whole group, small group, individual work? What within those structures am I seeing? Then it moves on to behavioral and cognitive engagement and the level of that. Then the instructional practices. We have two sections. We have our district initiative instructional practices that stem from specific data that we're seeing issues and problems, and we needed to put some things in place to help certain groups of kids. And I train our admin on, if we're going to check this box on this instructional practice, what do I need to be seeing in the classroom? So it's very specific and it's very trained. And then we go on to looking at classroom culture, teacher to student interaction, student to student interaction, and then finally some culture building strategies that we have talked about during trainings. All of this data is collected, and using the form that was created in Eduphoria, I print the report out and I put it into a dashboard that I've created. And that makes it very visible and actionable. And just to kind of give you an example of how we use this to evaluate that process, we were seeing that there was a very low percentage of student to student interaction. So we took that back, we used that to form our PD program, and then turn that around into PLCs and conversations about growth and all of these different things. So that really helped us get that feedback going and get that evaluation process of what we were doing. Is the data that we're collecting valuable, and what do we need to change it? What do we need to change if it's not as valuable as we need it to be? Did I cover what you wanted me to cover there?
Yeah, I think you covered it and then some. So it was wonderful opportunity for us to gain some insights into what your processes look like locally. So thanks so much for giving us all of that rich detail.
Sure.
So some of what Shelley started sharing kind of leads us into this next topic of data as actionable information. So I'm sure we've all heard some of the following phrases: drip or data rich, information poor, being data driven or data informed. And something I've come across recently that really makes me chuckle a little bit: if we have data, let's look at the data. If all we have are opinions, let's go with mine. This is something that we know we want to collaborate through these processes. We know that feedback plays a really strong role in here. And as we're engaging in walkthroughs and creating our observations, we know there's an introduction of some level of subjectivity that we engage in calibration processes to review and make sure we're being as objective as possible. So with all of this data collection, sometimes it can be a little hard to cut through the noise and figure out what exactly do we need to make that informed decision that we're looking forward to. So Jeremy, I'd love to hear from you first on this one. Knowing that you have so much access to data, what is it that you find crucial to review and look at in your strive to examine the data and inform your evaluation processes?
This is an excellent question. And I think one of the first things you have to just get settled on in your mind is that, yes, there is a plethora of data, especially if your district is rather large. And just to take it just like you were trying to eat an elephant, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. And so take the data in that kind of sense as well. And so I tend to look at this question through two lenses. And so the first is as like an evaluation administrator at the district level. And the second is as an actual teacher evaluator in general, whether that be as like a principal or as just a district admin that's assigned to a teacher. But when looking through the lens of a district admin, the first thing I like to do is look at performance trends and averages in the rubric across all domains and dimensions. And so to do that, I would spend a lot of time in the Strive analysis tools. Specifically, I'd look at the document summary and the detailed analysis tools, because they allowed me to compact a lot of that data into single sources and then filter it by campus and then by administrator, so I could see overall trends. And those overall trends, and using that tool to find those trends, helped me identify areas that might lack alignment, might have skew, and then dig in and ask questions about that. But aside from like overall performance trends, I would also spend a little bit of time in the appraisees portion of Stride and looking at specific feedback in walkthroughs and observations that were typed. I like to sift through all of that evidence to actually find behaviors and patterns to call out as exemplars when trying to identify gaps in practice or to engage in those collaborative communications, whether they be from a truly instructional coaching perspective or a evaluative perspective, either way.
Thank you so much for those insights, Jeremy. Shelley, I know you've already shared with us a bit about some of the data processes for feedback and reviewing the evaluation process. Are there any other pieces of the data that, from your perspective, you really try to key into throughout the evaluation process?
Yes, there really are. And one of the things that Jeremy said I really appreciated was the use of that exemplar and really being able to make sure that that is a valuable tool. Going along with what he said, also, critical data includes that calibration data that we perform, those calibration activities that we do, the correlation data between the alignment of student growth and teacher performance. All of those things are so valuable. We understand that that correlation isn't going to be perfect because appraisers are human, but it does give us that important area to focus on. And because of that walkthrough data that we collect that I described just a moment ago, we can examine whether those observation scores seem out of alignment with what we're seeing on a daily basis. And so, working on a process to help appraisers stay on top of this, I think the new overview that we see in Strive right now, that's brand new, I think is really going to help with that. And I'm excited about that just being one more piece that we can use to make our processes better.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing on this topic, Shelley. Okay, so next is really kind of honing in on some of the data that we can collect either through the goals that teachers and other staff are submitting. We have the option of professional goals as well as student growth goals, and then that walkthrough data that through the forms you've developed locally can be really targeted and specific to what you're needing to capture and the information you're needing to help those in your district grow. So in these district level roles, we know we're always looking ahead, and that can mean as early as right now, starting to prioritize professional learning for your spring planning time. And when others are announcing their New Year's resolutions, you might be focused on securing that speaker for your summer presentations or back to school sessions. And so, Jeremy, I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about how you stay ahead of the professional development needs and how the professional goals from the teachers might inform these training opportunities in the future.
So I feel like the first step in answering this is to really take a step back and try to analyze how teachers write their goals. A good goal uses language from the T-test descriptors. An example I've seen in the past is like, my professional goal is to finish my master's degree in the next year. That is a wonderful professional goal, but how specifically does that enact or change your instructional practice? What language from T-tests are you using and leveraging to try to increase or improve that instructional practice? So really analyzing how those are written is a good first step, because then they're much easier to connect to true professional development and professional development expectations. So like I was mentioning before, patterns identified from walkthroughs and observations are a great way to identify and start conversations that can be built towards making progress toward those goals, but it's also vital in picking those professional learning approaches, both individually and as a campus. So within those patterns, I'm seeing across groups of teachers, is that able to help me pick a professional development for me to create or to search for and bring in an outside resource? Or on a more individual level, are there learning opportunities specific towards reaching a specific goal for a teacher that was written that I can point them towards, whether that be a PD at a service center or a webinar I can point them to? And so it really is about looking at that evidence, connecting it to that goal, and then making the informed decision on the PD plan.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing some of those opportunities to connect, and that really the foundation of a strong professional goal that is aligned to what you are measuring in the evaluation system can be really impactful for driving that growth and professional learning opportunities. So we have spent some time talking about collaboration and how you get this off the ground with these conversations and really nurturing the relationships in this process. We've talked some about making sure that the data is actionable. And so now we're going to spend some time. What does this actually look like in the process? So we are foot on the ground. We are doing the work. We're going to turn our attention to some of the instructional conversations that might be happening at your school district. So we know we're engaging constantly in discussions around instruction, and this can look really different from one campus to the next based on some of the programmatic needs represented at the campus. So we're going to hear from Wayne next on this question. We know that in a large district, there might be programs offered at one high school versus another. So for example, when I graduated, my district, one of our high schools offered an IB program and the other two high schools did not. So if we know that there's things like this, and I think Wayne, you've shared in the past, you might have a campus where there's up to 25% of the courses are at the pre-AP and AP level. So I'd love to hear how, knowing that these programs exist, how might that impact instructional conversations, and how might this also influence the way you spend time in classrooms?
Yes, here in Lamar, we have 6 high schools, and we're a fast growing district. And this conversation is really important to us at the moment because of we're the fastest growing district in the state, and just exponentially growing. So where our conversations begin is weekly in our administrator meetings, and we bring evidence, and we ask our administrators to bring evidence to the meeting to talk about what an instruction look like, talking about individual teacher needs, do it much like a PLC for individual staff members. We look at what would be common, what would be good for our advanced level programs, as well as what's going on in our regular offerings. And what we see is a lot of commonality in terms of pedagogy and instructional practice. And so one of the ways we responded to our data last year is that we ensure that every campus has an instructional coach. Many campuses have 2, some campuses have 3 based off of the number of teachers. And so we're directly tying walkthroughs, what we're seeing, into individual teacher growth, and then expanding that out a little bit to what does this look like across a whole department. And so we've had a lot of success already this year addressing different teacher needs, especially knowing that some of our new AP instructors are brand new. Some of the people we had to put in the room said, what is AP? I mean, we started with what is AP, but we hired them to be an AP teacher. And so it's really important that we tie our walkthroughs and support systems for teachers in place using those walkthroughs.
Thanks for sharing, Wayne. And you brought up something very key at the end. Sometimes we need to start with those definitions and making sure we have that clarity. Everyone is on the same page of what do we mean when we're taking this action and making this step forward. So I love that you've been able to slow it down in some of those settings and really refine, here's what we're here to do, and here's the steps it's going to take for us to reach this outcome together. So Shelley, I'm going to turn the table back to you. When it comes to instruction, there's just so much variety of what we could spend our time talking about. In our planning, you shared that y'all really use a wide spread of the Eduphoria tools that are available. So can you talk to us a little bit about identifying an instructional need, supporting it through training, and then monitoring the implementation of a new instructional strategy?
Yes. One of the things that's kind of different in our districts is, we're smaller, and we don't have the instructional coaches, and we don't have, that level of support. So we have to keep it maybe a little bit simpler. So one of the things that we've done in looking at our data, we use the data that we pull from the AWARE application, from our curriculum-based assessments and STAR data, et cetera. And we look for some bang for your buck instructional strategies that are easy for teachers to implement. Research supports have a huge impact on the student needs that we're seeing, that we can monitor easily. So that's the first step. And then moving into the walkthroughs, as I mentioned before, that pulse check, we use that to monitor the implementation of those strategies that we've trained on. And there are few and they are specific. And so those are monitored through the use of in Strive of the walkthrough form. And then we pull in the lesson planning application, the forethought application, and we utilize the lesson checklist in forethought. So we put up those core instructional practices that we've all had conversations about. Every teacher's been trained on, every administrator's been trained on. We're monitoring them through walkthroughs. We're giving feedback to our teachers based on their performance surrounding these instructional practices. And then that forethought piece allows the teacher to check, yes, I'm utilizing this, I'm implementing this into my lesson today. And then as an administrator, we can run those reports to see the implementation, the degree of implementation, maybe that if we're not capturing it in the walkthrough, we're capturing it through forethought. So that's just kind of bringing all of those applications together and helping us do something that's tough because there aren't many of us to do the job.
Thanks so much, Shelley. I love that we're kind of seeing this really zoomed out. What does it look like in a large district that can engage different instructional supports? And what does it look like in some of our smaller districts, which we know are spread across the state? And how can you use these tools to gain insight from different lenses on the same topic? So thanks so much for sharing and making some of those connections for us. So next in this conversation is really looking at gathering some of that information through walkthroughs. So Shelley, you've spoken to this several times through mentioning your pulse checks, seeing how that is outlined in your Strive setup. So I think you've given us lots of rich context here. Wayne, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share with us, when you enter a campus, what are some things that guide you as far as what classrooms you go to visit, and what are you hoping to observe in your walkthroughs?
Well, I have 8 campuses that I supervise. I have 5 elementaries, a 6th grade campus, a junior high, and a high school. And one of the things we ask our principals to do is tier our teachers. And so we try to design support systems or make sure that as we're calibrating our walkthroughs, that we're getting to people who are new, people that we know whose student performance has been low. And so one of the things that I will do is check in with the principal and who's doing walks at the moment. We'll do calibration walks together. We'll talk about how we're going to coach as a result of that. How would you assign a coach to do this if you can't get to it? So we have an identified list, and then the principals each week, and they can stick with it. They identify what are we looking for consistently across the campus. And so by looking at the priorities that each campus establishes, I try to build off of that. Just to go back, I don't give feedback to teachers. I give feedback to principals about what did we see and is this consistent with what you've seen, and allow the principal to do the coaching. One of the other things that I'll do is that when I'm just by myself, if the principal's not available, then teachers know that I'm gonna go through. And so some of the things that I know are important, I just check that consistency check. Was your board configuration what you wanted to today? What was student discourse? Did I hear students using academic language appropriately? What was the engagement strategy? And I would just give the principal that consistent feedback of things that they're looking for in their weekly observations, and just try to partner with the principal about growing instructional practices across the campus.
Thanks, Wayne, so much for sharing what this looks like as you're supporting those principals through what you're observing in the classroom. So I think that's wonderful layer that you're able to bring and say, let's be really focused on these skills we want to see in the classroom, and let's then make those connections, find those trends, and get that to the campus leadership so they can continue to support their teachers. So thanks so much for sharing that. Jeremy, as you're reflecting on practices you engaged in at your previous campus work, we heard at the beginning that you got to engage in instructional coaching as well as really inform district practices in a growing area. So what were some things that you hoped to identify as you went into classrooms for walkthrough?
And yes, to that end, I was definitely kind of bridging across two separate roles there. And one of the things that we had to decide as a district, and this was something that was kind of talked about earlier in the webinar, was that you have to be setting the stage across all campuses to have a similar set of expectations on how this is executed. Are your walkthrough documents set up in the same way so that all of you are looking for the same things in the same way? That helps really not only align some of those efforts we were talking about earlier about finding trends and finding areas of growth, but it also allows you to connect more meaningfully to some of those coaching conversations. And so one of the things, and Wayne hit on this really well, I think, was I tried to focus on things that could inform practice, but also set the foundation for that coaching conversation. I like to treat walkthroughs like a mini observation. And in that sense, I really hope to find an area of reinforcement and an area of refinement. Sometimes an area of refinement is harder to pinpoint with some teachers, and that's perfectly fine if that's the case. But the teachers really like to hear about what they're doing well, but we also need to identify that thing that we really can improve in. And I wanted to really pinpoint it and not just fly it by and say, things are going great in this class, we don't need to worry about it, and not provide any of that evidence or feedback. Typically, I also tried to look for very specific phrases that are said to stimulate student thinking, because I'd mentioned before, I really like to have exemplars in my back pocket. And so when I see something that went really well, a specific way a question was asked, a specific way a student said something, I like to bring those almost verbatim things back to the table when we have that conversation to point out, this is what was said, and then this is how the students reacted, or this is what the student said, and then this is how you reacted. And when those kinds of things are brought into that coaching conversation from the walkthrough, it really helps make the conversation a lot more rich. And something that I used to find as a good just data point, whether I documented it or not, was a completely different story. And I also had to be very careful about who I asked in the classroom when doing this. So knowing the kids in your campuses is helpful in this realm. But like a lot of evaluators and coaches out there, I like to stop and ask a student, what are you doing? What are you learning? What are you making right now? And why are you doing it? I know when a student can answer that question, it's a surefire way to know for sure that the students are at the very least engaged enough to know what they're trying to accomplish, and they know what the objective of the lesson is.
Thank you so much for sharing those additional insights, Jeremy. And this brings back a reflection of mine engaging in instructional rounds and getting to see students interacting, walking in and seeing the opportunity for test corrections and a student choosing to opt out of that. And I simply ask them, are you willing to make the same mistake again in the future? To which that completely reset and changed their behavior. So it's so key when we're asking those questions and finding those exemplars of things to replicate across our instructional settings, that we are able to share that with others. So thanks so much for sharing your insight. We're going to transition now into our final section here. So taking all of this big picture information and starting to narrow it down into what does this mean for you in your intentional Strive setup. So as we round out this topic, first we want to hear a little bit about challenges that we might be facing. So we're going to hear from Shelley and Wayne on this one, and we're going to keep it brief because as humans, we could spend hours, days in discussion of what our challenges are, but it's still, I think, beneficial for us to be able to share this out. And sometimes hearing the challenges that others are facing helps us put our own in perspective and say, okay, I can take that next step forward today or tomorrow, whenever it is you're taking that next step. And it can really help us reshape and focus and not feel so overwhelmed by our own challenges. So Shelley, we'll start with you. Can you briefly state for us a challenge you're currently facing to refine district practices?
Yes, I think the biggest challenge for us is just making sure we're getting all of our appraisers on board with collecting good, thorough evidence, and then, using that specific evidence in conjunction with that rubric to rate the lessons and give specific, timely, actionable feedback to teachers. We're working on it, but that definitely has been a challenge for us.
Thanks so much. And I hear you didn't use the word calibration, but I hear that trend, that topic that we've come back to a couple times, having that calibration and alignment across those practices as well. So thanks for sharing what your focus is and what you're working on. Wayne, in your role, you've shared that you work across several campuses that may be exhibiting some different needs from one another. Can you briefly share a challenge you are working to overcome?
Our current challenge is it's in the area of feedback. We expect a minimum of 10 walkthroughs a week by each administrator. The actionable feedback, some people are excellent at doing a coaching piece and meeting with people one-on-one and getting an actionable change in instruction because they met face-to-face, but what they're putting on paper isn't actionable. So we're trying to build that consistency between in-person coaching and if all I leave you is, or able to give you is something on paper, can you be better because of the specificity of the feedback and the action that takes place as a result of it? And so we're trying to build that consistency between both ways of doing the giving the feedback.
Thanks so much. Another powerful process and system to really focus some time in on is that feedback, how we're communicating it, and what we can do when we receive it. So we're going to narrow our attention onto something pretty specific within Strive that you now have access to, and that is our activity tracker. So Jeremy, I'd love for you to kick off reflection here. How do you foresee this tool being dynamic and supportive of appraisers, especially principals? And do you have any tips for us on how to set up in this area so that we're getting accurate information in our activity tracker?
Absolutely. I think the intent behind even creating this was all linked to administrators really needing to be able to answer this question. I need to do some walkthroughs right now. Who do I need to go get right now? And they need to get that access to that information very quickly. Or even more broad, I need to do something with an appraisal. What do I need to do right now and how am I going to do it? And the overview, you mentioned it earlier, is a great kind of first step, but the activity tracker is the next kind of deeper dive. And so as you access that appraisal activity tracker, you can get access at your fingertips to essentially every current and upcoming overdue or at risk evaluation activity that has to be accomplished or should be accomplished. And it gives you a really quick idea on where you need to focus your attention and potentially on who. There's a lot of things built into it that you can click straight on the task and open the task and start working on it. Some actions are even built in deeper, so you can take an action within the table itself. Now, to get the most bang for your buck on really making this table as powerful as it can be, the biggest tips I have is to go back into Strive and into your evaluation processes and look at how they're set up. Have you set minimum numbers of required documents? Have you set due dates? This table won't populate in a way that lets you see things that are overdue or at risk or on track unless those due dates are set for those documents. And you won't get those handy dandy document counts on this side because, like Wayne said, his district requires 10 walkthroughs a week. Well, if you're looking at 10 walkthroughs a week, you probably have a set minimum of walkthroughs per teacher as well. And unless you've set those minimums, it's hard to see, oh, I probably need to get some walkthroughs on teachers that have 0 out of 5 done, if 5 is the minimum expectation, versus a teacher that has 3 out of 5 done. Helps you focus that attention and really get in there and be more equitable. And not only more equitable, but more intentional about how you're executing your evaluation process.
Thanks for those insights, Jeremy, and sharing some context of how to make sure this is set up appropriately to support those appraisers locally. So Wayne, this is a relatively new feature. I'm not sure how much time you've been able to spend with it just yet, but do you have any predictions on how this might save evaluators time and help them meet local expectations that have been set?
Well, I think it's invaluable. I think it'll save a lot of time if get in and show our principals how to use this. I know from how I look at principal activity each week, because I do a report each week on who's done their 10 walkthroughs or who's done more than 10 and start digging into the data. I think this will help me tremendously in keeping up with my principals as well as them being able to track their teachers. I think the equitable aspect of it, knowing am I spending my time in the right place, but is everybody getting feedback? And I think sometimes we forget that our best teachers need feedback also, and just making sure that we're always in and giving support to every teacher. I think this is invaluable.
Thank you, Wayne. What a great reminder that even our teachers that exhibit a lot of strengths in the classroom, they are just as much deserving of the feedback we can provide them, and they want to grow just as much as someone who might be struggling in certain elements of their instructional knowledge. So appreciate that reminder very deeply. Shelley, to wrap up this section, as you have explored this tool, are there any actions that you've already been able to take to make the activity tracker more usable for your staff?
Yes, actually. And just like Jeremy was saying, I found immediately that I needed to go in and tweak some things. And one of the things that I did, because of those requirements for a certain number of walkthroughs per week or a certain number of walkthroughs per 6 weeks for each teacher and so forth, I broke it down into smaller steps, smaller tasks, so that we had a certain number of pulse check walkthroughs and t-test walkthroughs for a 6-week period for each teacher. And so that then allows that tracker to be more specific. And I thought that was very interesting to me, and just being able to quickly see that was something that needed to be done, and something that really I had neglected. Was really good to see. And I think it's an incredible tool. I think it's going to be really valuable, and I look forward to digging into it more deeply and learning more about it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that reflection and digging into your system and realizing, hey, there's something that I can set up differently to support my staff. So that's an amazing reflection that you were able to take action on. And I'm sure your staff will appreciate that in the long run, that you've made those refinements, which is a big part of what the conversation and our previous webinar were really about. Is when do we intentionally take the time to say, you know what, we've been doing this a certain way for a while, maybe it's time to implement some adjustments here. So thank you so much for sharing how you've made some adjustments in a short amount of time and seen a benefit already. So this is kind of final opportunities to submit any questions in the Q&A that you might wish our panelists to speak to. We'll also be sharing some contact information if you would prefer to reach out to them individually. So to give a little bit of wait time for those to come into the Q&A window, I'll share some additional insights. So Shelley kind of spoke to a couple of these things. So we'd like to share with you all extended application connections. We've been here talking about Strive and the evaluation processes that you can represent in Strive, but there's other things you can do as well. So we talked about identifying opportunities for professional learning, but those are things that you can set up and make accessible to your teachers and staff through Strive as well, through our workshop and conference options. Shelley mentioned having instructional checklists and forethought. This is another area where you can engage in some data collection, see what lesson plans look like across your campus or across your district, and be really informed on where do I need to provide that targeted feedback. What are we saying we're doing, but then we're not observing it in the classroom, or vice versa. We're maybe not getting evidence of it through our lesson plan documentation, but we're seeing it in the classroom, and we can refine how we're making those plans. And then finally, form space. We spent some time talking about collecting feedback at scale of how the process is working. Form space is a wonderful opportunity for you to gather those insights from your staff so that you can continue to make these refinements in your processes. So looking ahead at what's next, we spent some time just a moment ago talking about the activities tracker that's now available to you in Strive. You also have with that an overview option. So this is available if you engage in appraisal actions. And what this is really a shortcut to get you to the meat of what you came to Strive to accomplish today. So this will help you quickly see at a glance your opportunities to engage in feedback, produce a walkthrough, and that evidence of the instructional activities that are taking place. In February, the state made some refinements to the teacher rating rubric that is part of the evaluation process through T-Test. We have represented that within the Eduphoria community as part of a summative template that you can pull into your system. So if this is a process that you're engaging in and scoring your evaluations in this capacity, you have a tool within the Eduphoria community that you can pull in that will reflect those recent updates from the TEA. We also have some exciting things happening in the online testing world, which may or may not be your primary focus. TriAware Beta, the feature set that's available there will be expanding soon. So we're looking forward to seeing some new functionality accessible through there. And we also, in the last weeks, days, and even hours, have released some improvements to online testing. So an equation editor is now available for math and for elementary and secondary math as part of our text entry solution. We also have inequality graphing now available, as well as other refinements to our different TEIs that are available in the system. We're always looking to connect and learn with you. So I'm going to drop a little bit of information in the chat related to this slide. We have a wonderful learning opportunity for your teachers and even for you if you just want to engage a little bit more and learn about what you have access to in Aware and Strive. So the link is in the chat. It is teachers.eduphoria.net. Here on that Strive learning site, you're going to have access to support your teachers in making those targeted professional goals that Jeremy was talking about at the beginning of our conversation. They can also use messages to collaborate and communicate directly with their appraisers. So they're always up to date. They can share evidence. And this also goes into designing an intentional student portfolio so you can engage in those growth conversations of what's taking place in the classrooms and how students are performing in those measures. So we'd love for you to check out that site and let us know how you're using it to support your teachers. Next up, we have upcoming webinars. So I'm going to drop these links in the chat. They're not available on our online help guide just yet. So you are the first ones that have access to registration. So if you enjoyed this topic or previous topics that you have attended, please check these out. We will be sharing on 3 different topics in the month of October. So transitioning to some online testing supports and how you can use measurements of those to really inform your local processes. So not just what is available, but how can you use it? How can you be intentional with how these tools are delivered to your students? Then we'll look at those student portfolios and really talk about growth and the correlation between educator effectiveness and student growth from that classroom and campus lens. And then we'll wrap up the month of October with an Ask Me Anything on student monitoring. So we're super excited. We tried one of these in the summer and we had great responses from everyone. It really energized us to hear your questions and be able to respond to you live. So we're looking forward to another opportunity in an Ask Me Anything format to hear your questions. And this is coming just before snapshot. So we'll give you ideas on how you can use things like monitor groups to track your students across the school year and make sure that you're knowledgeable of students that you'll be collecting data on at the end of the year. Okay, I have not seen any questions come in to redirect back to our panelists, but here is that contact information that I promised you. So if you would like to follow up with either Wayne or Shelley, please do collect this information, take a quick screenshot. I will also drop it in the chat so you can collect it there. And we are so glad that you joined us and stuck around for the full hour. We look forward to seeing you again. A big thank you for your presence and attentiveness this afternoon, and a big thank you also to Wayne and Shelley. We look forward to continuing to partner with you in the future.